All right, good afternoon, everyone. Bear with me just a moment while I get our camera and everything positioned. All right, good afternoon and welcome to today's live cooking demonstration. My name is Ryan Smith. I'm the Wellness Program Administrator here at Georgia State University's Employee Development and Wellness Services. By trade, I am a registered dietitian, and I am very excited to be cooking with you today. Before we get started, we are making use of the WebEx recording feature today. So we're going to record the session. If you or anyone you know would ever like to view it again, we do upload our recordings to our EDWS YouTube page. There we have a library of past cooking demonstrations, yoga and meditation, virtual workouts, stretch breaks, and more. So we highly encourage you to check that out. During today's presentation, if you've got any questions, comments, or issues with the audio or the video, please let us know in the chat box. Make sure to set your message to go to all panelists. That way my colleague, Tony Pilote, who's on the call with us, will be able to monitor it while I continue to do the cooking demonstration. With that being said, let's go ahead and dive in. So today we're going to be making a cheesy bean and quinoa skillet. Very, very simple recipe in terms of equipment. You're going to need a large skillet. You're going to make use of your oven, and then we're going to have a small pot that we'll be cooking the quinoa in. For simplicity's sake today, I've gone ahead and already pre-cooked the quinoa. When you're following the recipe later at home, you will go ahead and start that right at the beginning of the recipe with everything else, and the timing should work out pretty well. So to get started, I mentioned I'm using a large skillet. This is a 13.5-inch skillet. It is pretty darn big. If you've got one this big, that is ideal. We have quite a few vegetables going into this. They take up a lot of space. If you don't, maybe you've got a 10-inch or a 12-inch skillet, you can get by with that. Just be careful as you're stirring things. There'll be a tendency for it to kind of overflow. So I've got 2 tablespoons of oil in here. I'm going to put this over a medium heat to get started. And we're going to let that heat up for just a minute. Now, the first ingredient we're going to add in will just be our medium white onion that I've chopped up and diced here. If you're not a big fan of onions, this recipe does feature them prominently. We're putting an entire onion into this, which is quite a lot for some people, but it works really well with all the other flavors. Onions are very aromatic, and they kind of enhance all the other food that surrounds them whenever we cook them together. So this isn't really a recipe where skipping the onion is a great idea, because it is a centerpiece of some of the flavors that we're pulling together here. So I've got my medium white onion that's chopped up. I'm going to go ahead and just add that in, and then I'm going to give it a stir. I want it to pick up a little bit of the oil and then spread it out evenly across the skillet, giving it the opportunity to cook. And what we're going to do is we're going to cook it for about 3 minutes. We just want the onion to soften, and then we'll begin adding in some of our other ingredients. And again, I just want a little bit of the oil in contact with the rest of the onion. While that's cooking for 3 minutes, let's go ahead and start prepping some of our other vegetables. We're going to use a single poblano pepper today. Now, if you're not familiar with poblano peppers, they're next to other peppers in the grocery store. There's really nothing too special about them. They are a little spicy, very, very, very mild. And when I say mild, I mean just slightly spicier than like a bell pepper, which is not very spicy at all. So very, very low heat. They're great for a lot of dishes, especially if people are a little sensitive to heat. You're going to get a nice little bit of flavor, but nothing that's going to make anyone have trouble eating the food. So my cutting method, I usually cut the top and bottom off, and then I pull the little pit out there with all the seeds on it. Then what I'm going to do with this tube is I'm going to take the knife and just cut it in half. That's going to give us a little bit of a flatter piece to work with, and now we can chop this up nicely. So like I said, small amount of heat here, not really anything to write home about. If you want to make it super spicy, you could certainly add in other peppers with this, maybe adding in some jalapenos or doing a serrano pepper, or if you want to go hotter than that, that is entirely up to you. But we're keeping it simple today with this. We're going to have a little bit of chili powder in here that will add slightly more spice, but nothing major, keeping it to be a fairly mild dish that I think will be a crowd pleaser. Now, as the onion's cooking, we do want to periodically stir it so that one piece of the onion doesn't get burned or overcooked. So I'm going to turn my attention over here real quick. And onions are great. You know, that smell starts to rise out of the skillet. Whenever someone's cooking with onions, you know it, and it really starts to fill the air and get you excited for the food that you're going to get to eat. So for this top piece here, I usually just cut around the stem, trying to get as much of the pepper off of it as I can, trying not to waste too much. And then I'll discard the rest of that. So we'll continue chopping this up. And we'll set that over to the side for now. Next up, I've got 2 Roma tomatoes. These are a little bit on the smaller side, or you can do 1 medium tomato. But we're going to go ahead and chop these up and dice them nicely. And I can hear the onions sizzling, so we're getting close to them being good to go. Let's go ahead and finish chopping these veggies. Now, tomatoes, I think we've had tomatoes in the last several cooking demonstrations we've done. They are so healthy for you. I think one of the healthiest foods out there. They are a great source of vitamin C, which is good for our immune system. They have lycopene in them, which is an antioxidant that has cancer-fighting properties, so very good to get that in. They're a great source of fiber, and they're a good source of potassium as well. And most Americans do not get enough potassium. We get way too much sodium and not enough potassium, and those two should ideally sort of balance each other out in the body. So tomatoes are a great food to add to your diet to help with that. So I'm just chopping these up here. I'm not doing too fine of a dice. I don't mind having some, medium-sized pieces in this dish. I think it'll work well. The goal is to try to have the pieces be similar in size to the poblano pepper that I cut up. Okay. All right. Now, if you're cooking along at home around this time, you should go ahead and preheat your oven to 400 degrees Fahrenheit. This is a good stopping point in order to set that up so that the timing works out well. I hear that sizzling. The next thing we're going to do is I'm going to add 1 teaspoon of minced garlic to it, give it even more flavor, and then we're going to stir and let the garlic cook for about 30 seconds. So that's half a teaspoon, and then the other half. And now I'm just going to stir that around. Smells great. I really like garlic. I think it's one of the easiest ways to make a dish taste good. So we got some garlic in there. If you want to use fresh garlic, you can. Just do 2 cloves of fresh garlic. Minced, I find to be a little more convenient because you can keep that in the fridge. So we're going to let that cook for a couple more seconds. Then what we're going to do is we're going to add in several of our ingredients at once. We're going to add in the poblano peppers and our chopped tomatoes. We're also going to add a 15-ounce can of corn. Now, this is just golden sweet corn with no salt added. We're trying to do the no salt added kind to keep the overall sodium lower in the recipe and make it heart healthy. So just your standard can of corn here. So let's go ahead and add those in. We'll start with the peppers and the tomatoes. I'm just going to scoop them into the skillet. Okay, next let's dump in the corn. All right, and now let's give it a little more flavor. In terms of seasoning, we're going to be using 2 teaspoons of chili powder, 1 teaspoon of ground cumin, and a 1/4 teaspoon of salt. Again, we're trying to keep the sodium a little bit lower overall, especially since we're going to be adding some delicious cheese towards the end. We want to make sure everything's balanced. So let's get the cumin, chili powder, and salt in there. And now go ahead and give that a stir. And I know the camera's far away from the stove, but I do want to show you what that's all looking like. I just love all the color we've got there, the rainbow of vegetables going on. It's smelling really good. So we'll put that back on there. And we're going to let that cook over that medium heat for about 5 minutes now. We're looking for the vegetables to begin to soften. And the reason we add them in the order we do is that different vegetables take a longer amount of time to cook. By timing it like this, we make sure that everything comes out at a nice texture and a nice consistency towards the end. So the next ingredients we'll be adding are going to be beans. This is a can of low sodium black beans. I've rinsed and drained them, which actually helps get even more salt off of it. So you can use a colander to do that. So a can of black beans, just a 15-ounce can. We've got 1 1/4 cups of shredded cheddar cheese, or you can use like a Mexican blend of cheese, whatever works for you. So we're going to add those 2 ingredients in, and we're also going to add in the quinoa, which let me grab that real quick. So I mentioned I went ahead and pre-cooked the quinoa. Now, if you're not very familiar with quinoa, it's sort of like brown rice. It's got a slightly different texture to it. It's very, very nutritious. It's a good source of protein compared to most of the other grains out there. It is a whole grain, so it's high in fiber and B vitamins. I can show you what that looks like. I have the tricolored quinoa, so you can see there's some light brown, some of the red, and the darker brown as well. It doesn't really matter what brand you get. All quinoa is going to be a healthy choice for you and a good grain choice. So if you're not a fan of quinoa, or maybe you don't have quinoa, you could certainly swap this out with brown rice or even white rice if that's just what you happen to have on hand. It's still going to work well with the recipe because we're just combining a number of different like Mexican cuisine flavors, and it will work well with other types of grains like rice. So we've got these lined up here. We're going to let this cook a couple more minutes. I'm going to give it another stir real quick. Now, something I do want to mention is the idea behind this recipe is we're going to combine everything in the skillet. And then if you have an oven-safe skillet, you can actually just pop the skillet into your oven for the baking portion. Now, I want to pause here, though, because your skillet may have different heat limitations than other people's skillet. So, for example, mine has a plastic handle, which means it is not safe in the oven at a very high temperature. So what I'm going to do is transfer it to a baking dish. I think this is nice because if you've got leftovers, it makes it easier anyway because you've already got it in a dish. You can put the lid on it and pop it in the fridge. So that's sort of my preferred method. But if you're trying to dirty less dishes, maybe you're planning on making enough that your family or your household will be able to eat it all in one go, you can dirty up less dishes by just keeping it with the skillet. But again, check with your individual skillet, see what the heat limitations of it are, because we are going to be baking at 400 degrees. And if it's got a plastic handle, that's not going to be safe for the skillet. So definitely double check that. Like I said, my preference is to just move it into an oven-safe baking dish and cook it that way because we're basically making like a large casserole. So it's been cooking for a couple minutes. We're going to add the beans, the quinoa, and the cheese in now. And I failed to mention the amount of quinoa. Of course, when we send out the recipe, you'll have that information. We used 1 cup of quinoa and 2 cups of water. So you just follow the package instructions on your quinoa, but that's a cup of dried quinoa. Of course, like rice, whenever you cook it, it expands and you get a much larger quantity out of it because you can see there's probably about 3 to 4 cups of it in there now that it's been cooked. So we'll go ahead and add that in. Okay. And then we're going to use half of our cheese and mix and stir it in now. And we'll save the other half for later so we can top it with it. And then we're going to give that a stir and mix it. And I'll bring it over so you all can see what we're looking at. Okay. Now you can probably see my point about needing a large skillet. This is quite a large quantity of food. The recipe says that it makes 4 servings, but in my experience, you can probably get closer to 6 servings out of this because, again, that's a pretty big volume of food right there. So you can see why that large skillet's going to be really important. If you've got a smaller one, you're probably going to struggle with this step a little bit to be mixing it all together. I actually went out and specifically bought a larger skillet for this because that's something I've had difficulties with other recipes where the largest skillet I had just wasn't cutting it. I picked this one up for about $20 at Walmart. It's served me very well so far, so definitely recommend upgrading a skillet if you're looking to make more recipes like this. So we've set that up. What I would recommend at this point, like I mentioned, is transferring it to a baking sheet. Then what you'll do, once it's in whatever you're going to cook it in, whether it's your skillet or your baking sheet, you'll use the remainder of the cheese to add a little bit of a layer of cheese on top. And then whatever oven-safe dish you've got, you'll move into the oven on the middle rack and bake for 15 minutes at 400 degrees Fahrenheit. I've already pre-baked one, so I'm going to go ahead and grab that now so you can see what the final result looks like. Okay. So there is our final dish. It smells so good. I'm really hungry. I have not had lunch yet today. So our final dish is there. You can see all the different colors, the black beans, the green poblano peppers, the red tomatoes popping out there. I'll hold it a little closer. It's got a very, very nice, let me actually grab another, here we go. A very, very nice layer of cheese on top, which just tastes delicious whenever you bite into that. And just for garnish purposes, to make it look a little nicer, if you're planning to serve it at home, I've got a little bit of cilantro here that I'm going to chop up real fast. And you can sprinkle that on top. The photo that I showed at the beginning of today's presentation had some cilantro on it. If you're not crazy about the flavor, you can skip it. This is mostly just for aesthetics and making it look nice. So you can sprinkle some of that, get a few more pops of green in there. All right. And there you have it. That is the cheesy bean and quinoa skillet. Like I mentioned, the recipe says it makes 4 servings, but I think you can really get 5 or 6 out of this easily with the amount of food that you end up making. In terms of storage, this holds up great in the refrigerator for up to 4 days. It reheats really, really well. All the cheese melts again. You get that nice warm gooiness to it. So definitely great for bringing to work or having leftovers, just popping it in the microwave to get it heated back up. Nutritionally, if you do divide it into 4 servings, each serving is just over 500 calories. You'll get about 20 grams of protein. Our protein's coming from the cheese, the black beans, and the quinoa. So we've got 3 different sources of protein, 2 of them being a little more plant-based, and then 1 being an animal product with the cheese. In terms of fiber, this dish has about 10 grams of fiber per serving, which is close to 30 or 40% of your daily fiber goal. So fiber is very healthy for us. It helps us maintain a healthy cholesterol. It can help us feel satisfied on less full food, and it helps us with having healthy bowel movements, which, that's something that we may not all want to talk about publicly, but of course it is important for our health. It's very good for gut and intestinal health. So having that fiber really, really benefits that. It can also be helpful for blood sugar control as well by allowing your body to sort of space out the rise in blood sugar rather than it going up really quickly. It'll happen gradually and give you some sustained energy. So a lot of nutritional benefits there, not to mention all the different vitamins and minerals we've got in here. The cheese is contributing a good bit of calcium to this as well for our bone health. So all around, we've got protein, we've got vegetables, healthy whole grains, and then a little bit of dairy as well. So a great combination for a very well-balanced meal. I saw a comment just pop up, and I love this comment already. So it's a question of if we wanted to add shredded chicken. Yeah, I think shredded chicken would be a very natural fit for this. Certainly, you could also do things like ground turkey if you wanted to do a heart-healthy meat that was like a ground-up thing, maybe some crumbles or something like that. In terms of the amount, because I see the question was also about the amount of shredded chicken. So this has a pretty good bit of protein already from the cheese, the beans, and the quinoa, like I mentioned. So I really don't think you'd need to go too heavy on the total amount of chicken. Given the fact that this is designed to make about 4 servings, maybe doing a small, like 1 to 2 ounce portion with each serving. So meaning the total might be maybe 6 ounces of chicken. Again, doesn't have to be super heavy hitting. This is a pretty filling meal already, so I wouldn't want to go too overboard with that. Of course, you could do even less than that if you wanted to. Just a sprinkle of some ground turkey or some shredded chicken, I think would fit nicely in here. Here's a question. Can this be used as a dip to eat with tortilla chips? I know that reduces the health benefits. So absolutely. What I'd recommend doing is if you want to use this as sort of like an appetizer or just something to dip chips into, take the quinoa out. The quinoa is very healthy for us, but it's a significant source of carbohydrates or carbs. That's the main source in this meal. It's nice for meals to have a good source of carbs. It helps balance things. But if you want to eat tortilla chips, which are also a carb, you could pull the quinoa out, make everything else exactly the same, bake it for the same amount of time, and then you've got a really good, basically like nacho dip that's still healthy for you through all the different veggies in there. So I love that idea. I could see the scoops tortilla chips working especially well, maybe filling those with these. I think that'd be really tasty. Great question. All right. Oh, I see a couple people complimenting how it looks. Yeah, very, very delicious looking. As soon as I'm done with this, I'm going to dive in and enjoy some. Like I mentioned, I'm very hungry from all the good smells in the kitchen. So pretty straightforward recipe. Definitely recommend investing in a big skillet though. I've made a couple of recipes like this, and having this has made the difference. I'm not spilling things all over my stove like I normally am. And again, just a reminder, if your skillet is not oven safe, and you want to check on this, don't assume that it is. If it's not oven safe or you don't know, get an oven safe baking dish. I think it works really well for this application. I've got a lid here, so as soon as I'm done with leftovers, I pop this on, put it in the fridge, and then I've got my meal for the next couple of days. Oh, here's someone else talking about they've cooked with quinoa recently for a vegetable soup they made. Yeah, quinoa is phenomenal food. Really, really great to add at different things. So we are going to be sending out a copy of this recipe. So of course you can give it a go at home, maybe make any customizations or fun twists to it that you might want to. We talked about like the shredded chicken, for example, or using it as sort of a healthy nacho base. So I love those ideas. We're also going to have that recording sent out, and we'll upload it to our YouTube page, as I mentioned at the beginning of today's presentation. If you do not already get our emails, we do events like this all the time. We do 2 cooking demonstrations a month, as well as a variety of other offerings like yoga and meditation, virtual workouts, stretch breaks, and more. Tomorrow, we are going to be doing our yoga and guided meditation session from 12 to 1:30 p.m. So definitely check us out if you're interested in that. All of our events are posted on the GSU web calendar and on our website. But if you're not on our mailing list, you can email us at edws@gsu.edu. We'll get you on there, and we send out a weekly email to keep everyone up to speed on all of our different offerings. And I see Tony just dropped that email in the chat. Thank you, Tony. So with that being said, thank you everyone for attending today. Oh, one more question popped up. What about using lentils instead of black beans? Great question. So you absolutely could use lentils, and you actually could use other beans as well if you wanted to do kidney beans, pinto beans, maybe a mix of different beans. Black beans are kind of the go-to for a lot of Mexican dishes, but you could certainly swap them out. If you wanted to use lentils, the big difference, of course, is you'll need to cook those lentils separately from everything else. You're not really going to be able to cook that with the rest of this. It won't work out. I'd recommend cooking the lentils, having them nice and warm, and then during the step where you would add in the quinoa, because the quinoa is fully cooked, you could add the lentils in there and then pop the whole thing in the oven for 15 minutes to allow it to bake together and sort of mingle with all those flavors. So yeah, you'll have to let me know how that goes. I do think that could definitely work though and be another healthy substitution. So thank you everyone for attending today. Keep an eye out for that follow-up email. We'll also have a short survey where you can let us know what you thought of today's session. If you've got ideas for future recipes, things you'd like to see, or maybe even some constructive criticism, we'd love to hear it. We're always looking to improve. So have a great rest of your day and keep an eye out for that email. Thank you.